Hi everyone, so today we're taking a look at the problems and failures of Titanfall on the Xbox One, because unfortunately this is a game that's been released with a lot of problems, and the root cause really is the Xbox One. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Many of the issues that I commented on during the beta, and I said I didn't think were going to be able to be fixed before launch, I was correct. They haven't fixed them before launch. And so what we end up with a game like Titanfall is a series of compromises, purely because of the Xbox One. For instance, 6v6 players. No one could really understand why we were only going to get 6v6 players until you play Titanfall on Xbox One, and you realise that if they'd gone 8v8 or more, simply the console wouldn't have been able to cope. It's as simple as that. The fill rate required for stompy robots exploding with guns going off, unfortunately, brings the Xbox One to its knees. Frame rate drops are prevalent throughout Titanfall on Xbox One, to a point where I started to wonder whether the game was actually going to be playable at all, really. We saw frame rates as low as 5 frames a second at regular intervals. And also, during actual gameplay where you've got a lot of robots, Titans, on screen at one time, the frame rate was dipping quite easily under 15 frames a second for long stretches of time, 3 to 5 seconds at a time. Anyone who plays Twitch-based first-person shooters or anything like that, frame rate is absolutely crucial. And when we take that hand in hand with resolution, people the other day were screaming at me saying, resolution isn't important, frame rate is all important, frame rate's the most important thing in a shooter. Well, alright, where do you stand now, guys? Because the frame rate in Titanfall on Xbox One is trash, frankly. It is almost unplayable in places. It completely overshadows the competency of the game's developers here, who have done a phenomenal job at producing Titanfall, at creating a really world-class shooter, but being completely dragged down by, frankly, the poor system performance of the Xbox One. Now, what we've heard from Respawn, just a couple of days after launch of Titanfall in the States, was that the additional power they were expecting to get from the Kinect, this additional 8% Microsoft were going to give them from turning off features on the Kinect, has not been realised yet. And so effectively Microsoft have allowed this game to go out knowing that it wasn't going to hit any kind of quality bar. Because they haven't turned over this extra power to the developers, effectively Titanfall is running around 8% slower than it should be. Yet Microsoft allowed this game to be released. So let's talk really about Titanfall as a series of compromises, because originally the guys at Respawn were not going to release this on an Xbox console. They were only building this game for PCs. And then, a little while ago, let's say around a year ago, EA did a deal with Microsoft to bring it exclusively to Microsoft's ecosystem. So, Xbox 360, Xbox One and PC. Now, what I personally think is at that point, that's when the series of compromises really kicked in for Titanfall. Before, they were probably quite happily producing a PC game, they were going to put it out there, see how the market worked, and then maybe do an Xbox or a PlayStation release towards the end of 2014 once they knew the market was going to support a game like this. And of course, the gameplay is fantastic on PC. If you're running this game with a stable frame rate locked at 60 frames a second, with moderate hardware in my opinion, not low-end hardware, but just moderate hardware. When I'm running this game on a PC with a nearly 4-year-old Core i7 processor in it and 16 gig of RAM. You don't need the latest and greatest equipment, you just need reasonable spec. And this game absolutely flies along, being it on the Source engine and all, it should be. But for my mind, the whole thing that Microsoft have managed to do here is score yet another own goal and give everyone another reason to say the Xbox One is underpowered. Because if you allow your games developer to release a game on a deadline for your console, yet you haven't got them the power of the Kinect sorted out yet, so they're not utilising the full power of the Kinect. If they're still having problems getting the ESRAM and the resolution kind of working well together, so the amount of data you're putting into the ESRAM versus obviously what you want on the screen at the resolution you want to do it, then effectively you're just saying you don't care what people think of your console, Microsoft. And enough people are now looking at Titanfall on Xbox One and scratching their heads as to why this thing was released in this state, frankly. The frame rate issue is a major one. And whilst I accept that Respawn are going to release a patch which might improve the resolution to 960p or whatever they're going to be targeting, ultimately it will still be a way short of 1080p. And if they're struggling for resolution to do 792 and achieve a stable frame rate, then wow, what hope have we actually got for Titanfall on the Xbox One right now? Strictly speaking, if they release that extra 8% power, it shouldn't go into increasing the resolution, it should go into making the frame rate stable. Because right now, at a higher resolution, we're probably still going to have these really nasty frame rate dips. Overall, Titanfall as a game is flawed on the Xbox One. It probably shouldn't have been released, at least not at this juncture in the game's development. I personally feel Respawn needed another 6 months. Another 6 months for Microsoft to get their act together, to get this power across to developers, to potentially improve DirectX 11.2, potentially DirectX 12, although I don't think we'll see that until 2015 myself. And so really empower the developers to make the game look and feel as good as possible on Xbox One. It just seems that Microsoft are now kind of rolling away on a delivery schedule, and actually they're not really taking an eye to quality and how these things are going to land for consumers. And in many respects that is exactly the problem Microsoft had over the whole of 2013 as well. The attention to detail, the care for the consumer who is going to ultimately be buying this product and then talking about it to their friends. Microsoft do not have an eye on that right now, and I think personally it's hurting them in the long run. This is not to say that Titanfall is not a phenomenal game. It is. The gameplay is fantastic. This is Call of Duty Mark II, effectively, with big stompy robots. But when we look at the problems and the failures of Titanfall and where it's having the biggest issues, it's sat right there on the Xbox One. It is not a great game on Xbox One because of these massive frame rate dips. Now I know some people say, "Ooh, what frame rate dips?" Well, I haven't encountered any. Well, all I can say is with 20 odd years of experience, there are frame rate dips and they are gnarly. And these are also being echoed by many other journalists as well, who were there at the private EA review session, bear in mind, 3 days before the game's launch. They got 3 hours to spend with the game to play through the campaign. And many of them mentioned the same thing. The frame rate is simply not stable. So, if all of that information was known beforehand, obviously it was from playtests, we were seeing it in the beta, ultimately this game was released too early. It was released in order to meet a deadline, not to meet a quality bar of the console it was targeting. And for my mind, that is going to do the world of damage long term to Titanfall's brand. People won't accept a game which has really glitchy frame rates when it's supposed to be a fast and frenetic shooter. You have to have those stable frame rates, and the Xbox One just isn't delivering right now. The question is this: how long will it take Respawn to get that 8% power boost from Kinect in place and also improve those frame rates as well, and hopefully maybe some resolution as well? Ultimately now, time is going to run out for Titanfall, because over the next couple of weeks and months, there's not really a lot of content there within the game as it stands right now. So we're going to be looking at DLC, and they're going to want you to pay for it. But the question is, will consumers actually be willing to fork out more money for a substandard game on Xbox One?